to Paris Business School. So that meant she had lots of slides ready to go. So Jill, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm shocked that so many people want to learn a little bit about the luxury industry. Those who know me know I'm very passionate about this business. My entire career was in the luxury industry, and the industry changed quite a lot over the course of the 40-odd years that I worked in it. So I'm going to give you an idea why people buy luxury products, and inside look at how the industry works and how it's changed. Okay, this is going to work.
The down arrow.
The down arrow is better. Okay, so I want this to be interactive. If you have questions at any time, please interrupt me and raise your hand so I can or just speak out. But first, I think we need to talk about what is luxury, because luxury means something different to a lot of different people, and it's a lot of different things. So, anybody want to say what their definition of luxury is?
Something I can't afford.
Yes, something I can't afford, or I have to struggle to afford.
Yeah, something very well made, very high quality materials.
Or something you may not really need,
Yeah.
but you want to because it might be better, but definitely better for your image.
And I'll add something else, which is something you think when other people see you using or wearing it, they'll think better of you for that.
All of the above is true. Exclusive? Yes. Yes.
I was going to say something that not everybody.
It's a lot, all of those things. And it is not just about clothing or handbags, which is what you think of first when you think about a luxury product. This slide here is about vacations, luxury vacations. Here we're talking about the apparent stuff of the apparel and the things that you normally think of. That's the Jules Verne restaurant on the Eiffel Tower, luxury meal. So there are many, many categories of what is luxury. And also, to some people, just having free time is a luxury. So it can mean many, many different things to different people. So this is the dictionary definition of luxury. High expensive quality items and surroundings, comfort, non-essential, desirable but not essential, pleasurable, self-indulgent activity. It gives great pleasure. And I just love this quote. Coco Chanel stated that luxury is a necessity that begins where necessity ends. So let's talk about some of the different categories. Again, we think always apparel, haute couture, pret-a-porter, ready-to-wear, sportswear, handbags, shoes, small leather goods, luggage, etc. Eyewear, this is a category that's relatively recent, and a lot of the big brands went into eyewear with their brands through licenses agreements. Timepieces and jewelry. I think the likes of Cartier, Tiffany, these are brands, all of these brands have been around for some of them hundreds of years. But there are many, many different categories. Cars for the guys. And then services, this is a hugely growing part of the luxury industry, hotels, restaurants, any of the service industries. So what makes a brand a luxury brand? These are the 10 core characteristics when you think about a luxury brand. It's innovative, creative, easily identifiable. There's two logos that you can easily identify with. They consistently deliver superior quality, or you have the feeling that they're giving you superior quality anyway. Exclusivity in the way they're produced. The brands tightly control where and how their products are produced. They often have a heritage of craftsmanship. They're known for the quality of the workmanship. They value handmade. Those things are important to their ethos. They have a distinct brand identity. We just see that with the apple. That's just an apple. We all know what that means. Global reputation, emotional appeal. This is huge. All of the brands, luxury brands, often all have a huge emotional appeal. Premium pricing, and I'm being polite because it's more like excessive pricing in my opinion. And high visibility. People will recognize the brand, whether it be on a person or in the store itself, walking down the street, etc. It's highly recognizable and visible. So why do some people buy luxury brands? Over the course of my career, when I started working in the luxury industry in I will say the late 70s, so I'm giving you my age because I worked for quite a long time in the industry. It really was bunch of cottage industry brands, and people who bought the brands bought it because they understood the quality of what they were buying. It was, I'd say, a happy few, but they were wealthy people who understood they were spending a lot of money because it was well made, it was hard to get, it was handmade, whatever it was. That changed over the course of the following 40, 50 years, and a lot of it's due to the way luxury brands have expanded. And we'll talk about that afterwards. But now people buy luxury brands because they feel like they need to be seen wearing it. It makes them feel a certain way. They want to be part of an exclusive club. They want to be seen as being able to afford something, so they have pride in ownership. A lot of different reasons: comfort, the quality, and a lot of it is the pampering of the experience of the purchase, which is really what my background was. I was a retail director for a number of luxury brands, and my goal was to open their branded stores, train the staff to deliver a certain customer experience that allowed for the brand's DNA to be represented in the experience the client had in the store environment. So the part of the whole experience is the way that a person physically interacts with the brand in the brand store. That was what I did. But most importantly, there's an emotional attachment that develops between the brand and the customer that it defies all logic. There's no real reason why. How many of you have Apple phones here? Okay, that's a luxury mobile phone. Why do you have to have an Apple phone? You don't have to have it, but you have an emotional attachment. I have an Apple phone. I feel better using an Apple phone. So the emotional part is a huge part of how the luxury industry works and why brands work really, really hard to make you love them. This connection makes the shopper want to buy the brand, and that's what they want. They want you to want to buy the brand, to talk about the brand, to want to buy more of the brand, and keep coming back. So why luxury brands strive to create and maintain this emotional bond is that action can be done and attraction is created in many, many ways. So often it's online now because we're all online. It could be with celebrity ambassadors. When you see Cannes, everyone studies what the clothing is and what bags they're wearing, what shoes, etc. It could be influencers, so that's on TikTok or whatever other platforms that the influencers use. And then through, specifically in the luxury industry, the physical experience in the store is really important. The luxury industry is among the last industry to really push online sales. It's really hard to create an emotional attachment to a product if you buy it online. Buying online is transactional. It's not an experience of any kind. But when the sum of all distinctive qualities of a brand results in the continuous demand and the commitment to the brand by consumers, the brand is said to have high brand equity, which is what they all want to strive for. So that's what you get when you have high brand equity. And we've all seen this line on across around the corner from here at the Louis Vuitton store. It's crazy. But people will stand in line to buy a lot of different brands. So high desire means brand loyalty, means sales. That's what they want. So this is interesting because Bernard Arnault, have you all heard of this guy?
Yes. Richest man in the world.
He's up there with Bezos and
He's number one
now he's number
He's
one,
number
only
one.
since this happened. This past month, it was the first European company to break 500 billion euros dollars value. Sorry, first European company. And this guy, it's amazing. He's young. He started. He's really one of the first ones that started to understand the value of the brands in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And through a series of acquisitions, most of them in the 90s and 80s, and this is when a lot of when the luxury industry changed from this cottage industry, he bought up a lot of brands. And there's two other groups that were also buying up brands. They understood the value of the brand. They understood the economies of scale. In other words, if they had a number of similar brands, they could use similar factories, or they had higher power in buying advertising pages in Vogue or whatever magazine, or they had better negotiation ability to get the best locations, because flagship locations for stores are extremely important, because the visibility, of course, is important to a brand. So over the course of the years, this is what the group has now in its portfolio. So you probably are buying a luxury brand from this group without even knowing it. If you look at some of the mix in here. His family fortune is now 193 billion euros. And it's not, he keeps it very close. I think they should be, but Succession, I know there's a lot of Succession fans in there. I personally think that they should be the family in Succession rather, because it's the same kind of thing. It's just his children in the brand, and it's tightly controlled. But there are two other groups that are pretty strong in the mix as well. So there's the Kering Group, which is another French owner. Those are brands like Bottega Veneta, Gucci. There's also Richemont, which is a French company. Cartier, Chloé. There are certain different brands kind of gravitated, or different groups gravitated to different brands. They all try to get a mixed portfolio. As you see here, we have originally Bernard Arnault started off, I believe his first purchase was Dior, and then he bought LVMH kind of out of they were in a difficult financial situation back in the 90s. And then you see how all the brands have kind of grown. The spirits kind of grew from the Moet Hennessy side of the LVMH. And then we have the fashion side with Dior, Loewe, Louis Vuitton, Givenchy, many brands. Cosmetics and perfume is an industry also that recently developed with a luxury side. It never really thought about luxury cosmetics. But there are many brands now, or brands that moved into the luxury cosmetic arena to allow accessibility into the brand. It allowed a client who couldn't afford to buy the ready-to-wear or couldn't buy the handbag but could afford a lipstick. A good example would be Givenchy makeup. Maybe some of you buy Givenchy makeup, but you might not necessarily ever buy a Givenchy outfit or a handbag. And another example is just using Givenchy. Originally, Givenchy was a ready-to-wear brand, but you can buy makeup. They do shoes and bags now. They sell eyeglasses. So this kind of expansion into other product categories allowed more accessibility and more people to be aware of luxury brands and to want to own luxury brands. So the sector is continuing to grow, and we all thought with COVID that nobody's going to shop anymore, it's over. No, not at all. What's driving the industry now are younger generations. They all a lot of them like visible signs of wealth. They like to be seen wearing certain things or experiencing certain things. And a lot of the growing economies, China, Southeast Asia, Pacific, India, there are growing populations of people with wealth, and these are the groups of people that are really the main force behind what's driving the luxury business now. I was sure when COVID ended in China and the restrictions were lifted that we'd have Chinese flooding into Europe buying all kinds of things, but no, they're not traveling as much. What they're doing is they're consuming luxury in their home country, which I recently read. I was really surprised about that. So it's not a phenomenon, it's an embedded thing. People want to buy luxury. So there's been a lot of talk about this, is who are Succession fans? A lot of other people here follow Succession on, is it HBO? There's some big Succession people here. This particular episode, I don't follow it. I don't particularly like it, but I don't follow it. This particular episode had a huge cry out over the ludicrously capacious bag. This Burberry handbag was a big faux pas. A big faux pas for her. Anybody have any thoughts about this? Any comments? Kathleen?
Well, first of all, that bag does not go with her outfit.
Absolutely agree.
Cannot hear what was said.
And
The bag doesn't match her outfit.
and Burberry, it might be a little déclassé as a top luxury brand among these people.
Absolutely, completely true. I will have to add, because I did a little research, that dress she's wearing is a Mage dress. And Mage is a brand that's not considered luxury, it's aspiring luxury. And she's wearing it with a Burberry bag, which as well has had moments where it's not really luxury. Not really luxury. So I want to talk a little bit about bling bling, and we have all of these, we see all these bling bling people around, versus quiet luxury. And there's been a big movement back towards quiet luxury, which for me goes back to the high net worth individuals, that's HNWI, which you see there, who were the original purchasers of luxury in the beginning and still do consume quite a lot of luxury, but in a quiet kind of way. Quiet luxury is the art of spending hundreds, if not thousands, without looking like you did. So we kind of get nauseous looking at that. But we have no problem with, in succession, Sheed Roy's wardrobe, she looks like she's in very simple classic suits or business slacks and so on and so forth. She's wearing Max Mara, she's wearing another luxury brand. Or Kendall Roy wears all these really cool leather jackets. Well, those are Tom Ford leather jackets at $5,000–6,000 a pop. And they had this kind of horrific reaction to Bridget's Burberry handbag because she's aspiring to look, because she's in this group, to feel like she belongs or to look or behave like that. So, interesting, I think. Mark Zuckerberg is another example, because he wears these gray t-shirts every day. Everyone says he's wearing a gray t-shirt from Uniqlo. That's not the case. Those t-shirts are 400 euros a pop from Bruno Cucinelli. And Gwyneth Paltrow is another one. She wears very simple understated clothing, but it's very, very expensive what she's wearing. So less is more, and the wearer is the one in quiet luxury who benefits from the fine materials and the cut of the garment, rather than having the need to be seen in a particular brand. So, I know we have Apple fans here. Who has an Apple computer? A lot of us, yeah, a lot of us. Okay, you could buy a computer in that store, but you choose to buy a computer here. And what about that store? Is there any comments about that store? Everywhere across the globe, they look exactly the same, and that is on purpose, so that anytime you are going into an Apple store, you know where you are, you know what to expect, you know what you're going to find. Not only that, this is an inside ticket that I want you to think about when you go into stores now, because I'm going to talk about how you experience a brand in the retail environment. Everything in that store is studied. Nothing there is left to chance. When people go into a store, they tend to walk to the right. So when you walk to the right, you're probably going to find the latest models on display. You're going to find things that they want you to see first. They're going to click in your mind first, things they want to promote. Why is the Genius bar in the back? Why isn't it in the front if you go into the Genius bar?
I don't want to see people coming for repairs.
Yep. They want you to walk by the new products, they want you to walk by the accessories, they want you to see everything possible before you get to the back to do what you want to do.
Same reason you have to go through the casino in Las Vegas to get to the swimming pool.
Exactly the same. So it's really, it's all marketing, really, when it comes down to it. But all these things make you comfortable and make you understand the brands, see what the brand is doing different, stay longer in the store, certainly you're going to buy more, and talk about it to your friends. That's really what customer experience we're going to talk about next. It's like, you're not going to have that experience in that computer store. You're just going to go in and have a transaction. But all of these things are emotionally making you attached to the Apple brand.
They also train their employees very well.
Yes.
And so they don't talk down to you. There's an employee every 2 feet to help you with something. So
that's all part of a
that's all part
luxury
of
store
that. Yeah.
experience.
So it just increases that brand equity when you have a good relationship with the employee in the store.
Absolutely. And again, that's what my main job was during my career, was recruiting these teams, training these teams, and keeping them up to date on the different ways to maintain a connection with the customers in the store. Anyone who came into the store needed to have a certain kind of experience in order to create that bond. What brand is this? Well, guys, you guys know this. Just think a minute.
Hermes? Prada?
No. I know you know this brand. You do.
Oh, it's Italian.
I know you're a big fan of this brand. Yeah? No, it's not.
Support.
No guesses? No.
The orange is telling me something.
Tiffany?
Tiffany, yes. Tiffany blue.
Oh, the green.
It's green.
It's my slide, sorry. It's that turquoise blue, in that little Tiffany blue box. We always recognize it. At every Tiffany store across the globe, and they are global now. It's also part of the LVMH group. That's another one he bought up. Just the color blue can help you identify in the retail environment of a brand. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Tiffany, because they have a huge flagship store on Fifth Avenue. Most of us Americans might know it. It was closed in 2019, right after LVMH bought the brand, to be renovated, and it just reopened last month. That store represents 10% of their sales. It's probably 5 or 6 stories, and they have private selling rooms, they have restaurants, they have a zillion other things going on to keep you in their environment. And when Mr. Bernard Arnault was asked how much it costs, he won't answer how much it costs to renovate the store. They estimate around $500 million. His answer was, you cannot dream when you talk numbers. Again, the emotion. But what I thought was interesting, instead of thinking about profitability, Arnault urges his executives to think about desirability. Again, we're getting that. How do we keep creating that bond, maintaining that bond? When you create desire, profits are a consequence. That's what he said. So any of you going back to New York, I would love if you check it out, send me pictures, because I would love to see that store, and I'm not going to New York in the near future. So now I'm going to talk about my background a little bit. My career was mostly with accessories. I worked for Bottega Veneta for a number of years, Italian handbag brand, now part of the Kering Group. And I worked for Lancel for a couple of years in the US. And I worked for a division of Nokia called Virtu. Has anyone ever heard of this brand?
Yes.
No. It doesn't exist anymore. But when I was interviewed and hired, I was in a James Bond kind of situation. I interviewed answered an ad. Do you understand the luxury industry? Blah blah blah. I was offered an interview in a hotel room in Paris, and I said to Didier, my husband, I said, if I don't come back in 4 hours, call the police, because I don't know what I'm getting myself into. And they called me back for a second interview, and in this second interview, I found out it was Nokia in a James Bond kind of environment that launched this brand called Virtu. This is back in 2001. And basically what it was this guy's name was Frank Nuovo, who was the head designer of Nokia, and he's the one who made the interchangeable exteriors on the plastic Nokia phones. Everyone remember those? You could buy colorful exteriors, you could make it instead of the plastic gray, but this is their best-selling phone ever. And a guy who lives in California, lives in a beautiful house, has a number of beautiful watches, drives a beautiful car, and he looked at his plastic Nokia phone, he goes, "Look, there's something wrong with this picture." I think there's a market for beautifully made, handcrafted luxury mobile phones. And they went into, Nokia accepted the project and went into this James Bond kind of research and development. Over 70 patents were created in the creation of this particular phone. This is the phone that was first launched in the store that I opened on Rue Royale. We had 6 models, or 6 versions of this phone called Signature. The least expensive was 6,000 euros in 2002. And this one, which is Pave Diamonds, was 72,000 euros. And we had certain models over the course of the years that went up. We had a partnership with Boucheron, the jewelry company, that was 320,000 euros. We did sell one. And people would come into the store and say, "Are you selling furniture here?" Because we have just these 6 phones. But the whole experience was, when you have 10, 15, 20 people who come into the store in a day, you really have to convert that client. So it was a whole experience in terms of, how did you greet the person? Where did he walk in the store? Where did you sit them down? What did you offer them? Did you offer them something to drink? How did you get the phone? If they asked to see a phone, how did you get the phone, and when did you get the phone into their hand? Once you have a physical connection with a product, there's a huge emotion, that bond, that emotional attachment happens. Just like if you were in a clothing store, when the salesperson gets you to go into the dressing room and put on the shirt or the dress, you're 3/4 of the way to the sale. So I'm hoping that you guys will remember all these kinds of things when you're in any store now, because it's all part of what brands do to try to get you to be loyal. So it was a really incredible experience. We started with the one store on Rue Royale. I opened concessions in Selfridges in London. I opened stores in New York, the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas, stores in Beijing and in Singapore. And when I left the company in 2010, there were 24 owned stores by the brand, another 15 or so that were franchise store, and it was over 200 million euro business, believe it or not. It didn't work really well in the United States because it was never about the technology. The technology was tried and true Nokia technology. And the resistance was because at that time, that's when the iPhone was really coming up. It's, well, does it do the same thing as an iPhone? Does it do this? Does it do that? No. It's more about when you're going into a business meeting and you have an Hermes briefcase and you're wearing a Zegna suit and you take out your plastic Nokia phone and put it on the table, there's something matter with that picture. And that's really what we were selling. Just to give an idea, we had a lot of very incredible clients. Even in the Rue Royale store, the Bongo family from Congo, they're the presidential family. They would come in and buy 4 or 5 phones at a time. I would send salespeople to a hotel suite to see very, very high level people who don't want to be seen in public, who wanted to buy phones. It was an incredible, incredible experience. So, yeah, so that's a little bit of my war stories about being in the luxury scene. I could bore you all to tears, but I'll move on.
So Jill,
Yeah.
what happened then?
What
It must
happened?
exist. I mean,
Yeah,
at
it
the end of the
does,
story.
yeah, thank you for that, it's a good question. What happened was Nokia was really feeling the pains of the development of the iPhone. They got, in my opinion, a little bit too big for their britches and didn't keep up with the technology and were not watching closely what was happening in the rest of the industry. And they thought they could continue to do their thing, their way. And then the iPhone came onto the picture. And then they had to really, they were really with their pants down, had to really pull the bootstraps up and start working on the technology. So they were losing market share over the course of those years. Virtu was what I always say, it was a little pimple on their butt of their business. It was a very, very, very small part of their business. It was sold in branded Virtu stores, but it was also sold wholesale in many watch and jewelry stores. So there wasn't not just retail branded distribution, which helps with the visibility and helps drive people to understand the brand, and then they would choose where they would buy Virtu, whether in a jewelry store or in a Virtu store. But it was a very big money-consuming way to bring up a luxury brand. And when they got in this situation with the iPhone, they decided to get rid of the things that were not important to their core business. So they saw an opportunity with a private equity company, which is often what happens in the luxury industry. Whether you have those 3 groups that I talked about, LVMH, Kering, or Richemont, underneath that there are a whole series and levels of private equity groups who understand how, if they can take the brand and the equity of the brand and do some economies to scale, they can very rapidly make money on these companies, bring up the brand, and then they often try to resell the brand to somebody else. And the private equity, the Swedish private equity company that bought Virtu, and that for me, I personally left it that way. I didn't want to work for a private equity company. I know what happens when a private equity company becomes involved. And that's pretty much when it went downhill for Virtu. It was bought and sold a few times. I believe in Asia, in some places in Asia, it was a Turkish guy in the end who's the final owner of the brand and was taken to court a number of times and didn't pay the employees in the factory. The Virtu phones were made in the UK, in Hampshire. Hampshire, is that how you say it?
Hampshire.
Hampshire. So there were a lot of problems, but it was a beautiful story that didn't end well. Patricia.
Am I right that there has been no brand that took over a luxury phone brand? Apple has managed to combine somehow that
Yes.
brand idea with a common phone.
Exactly. Apple is really the only one. I mean, you can get some Samsung phones are up there in the price range because now it's really about the technology. People don't care about the materials really. And people, in those days, they didn't keep a phone very long. You had a phone, you kept it for a year or 2. They were built in obsolescence because the models were changing so quickly. And they didn't cost that much. They cost a couple €100, if that. Today, no, there's a lot of technology in the phone. People use their phone to do a lot more things. And you keep a phone a long time. I think an Apple phone is kept probably easily 5-6 years. A lot of people keep them less, but a lot of people keep them longer. So the whole industry really has changed. And it's just so expensive to make a phone like that technically the technology is built in to be obsolete. No matter what, that technology, that phone still works. I have a few of these. Demo phones, demonstration phones. And actually, they gave me one as a gift when I left, which I was really, really touched. They still work. They still work on the network, but they don't do very much, so you don't use it. They basically just make calls. Some of them can text. So it's really not an industry where luxury can really get their hands in, versus something like, I talk a lot about the eyewear industry, which is where I went to after I left Virtue. A lot of these companies realized that in these frames, these eyewear frames, if you're buying a Tom Ford brand or Gucci or Prada eyewear, you spend easily €300-400 at least for a frame. These frames don't cost very much. They cost €50-60 to be manufactured, so the margins are incredible. So basically what's happened is the two groups, Kering and LVMH, have now opened companies, and they've taken, when the licenses of their brands expire, and the big companies of the eyewear brands, they're taking the licenses back and they're manufacturing them themselves. So there are categories, because they're constantly looking for new categories where they can keep visibility and keep the brand's desirability alive, but phones is not one of them. So what are the benefits of experiential marketing? So that's what customer experience is, and that's really what my specialty is in a retail location. So it can take place anywhere along the customer's journey, but it's the easiest in the brand's location. So again, but why is it so important to have brands have their own branded stores? But what it does, it reinforces awareness and understanding. It brings affinity and loyalty. It offers ways for the prospects to try the brand, because you can read a lot about that Burberry handbag that was ridiculous, but you might want to try it on if you really liked it. You want to touch it, you want to feel it. If you're going to spend €3,000 or €4,000 on a handbag, you don't want to buy it online. You want to learn more about the brand. Why is it so expensive? What's it made from? Et cetera. It also, for the brand themselves, it gives them a trust marketing opportunity. So if you go in, and as you were saying, in the Apple store, when you talk about the experience that you have, you talk to your friends about the great experience, you talk about, if you're online, the person with social media that just had a great experience in an Apple store, whatever. All these things create buzz, create noise, create visibility for a brand. And for the brand itself, it allows sales generation. So often, think about this, if you go into a store, and even if you don't buy something, somebody might ask you, would you like to receive our promotions, or can I add you to our mailing list, whatever. It's a way for a brand to create a customer relations base, a database that helps them develop their sales and learn more about you, so they can answer your needs and solve your problems on a regular basis. So what is customer experience? It's the delivering of a unique and personalized experience. The sales team will show importance to your expressed or unexpressed desires. So what are unexpressed desires? When you're walking around the store, a well-trained salesperson will notice what you're wearing. If it's a jewelry store, they might notice your jewelry and your watch, so they know kind of what your potential is. And they might notice what showcase you might stop in front of, and they'll let you stop and have a look, and they'll know the right moment to try to engage you in some open questions. But the longer the guest stays, it's all about the experience they have, because the longer he stays, the more chances of him spending more, the more he'll talk about his experience, and more probability he'll come back. Exclusive experience brings loyalty. So you get this kind of experience in a luxury retail environment. You might not get it, probably won't, in a more transactional environment like H&M or Zara. Stores that it's more about volume, it's not about the experience. Even though those stores are all designed for you to walk a certain path through the store to experience certain things, but they'll let you do it on your own. The big differential in luxury retail is that this concept of clienteling, of the salesperson engaging with you in some way, being able to build a long-term relationship with you, create a database on what you like, what best way to contact you, what things are of interest, your child's birthday, your anniversary, anything it takes for them to have a way to keep in contact with you and know when there's some new product coming in, something they thought you might like, a color you were looking for, et cetera, et cetera. It's a way, it's also a way to continue to drive sales through regular contact. But clienteling is only possible when the brand controls the retail operation. So a brand in Galerie Lafayette has much less control over the way their brand is experienced than they do in their own branded store. So who's the most important person in the store?
Customer.
Not in France.
Everyone says that, the customer. So this is the person who controls the inventory, and this is the sales team. I agree, the customer is extremely important, but I don't agree they are the most important person in the store. For me, the most important person in the store is the sales team, because that's often the first human contact a customer or a client is going to have with the brand. And that salesperson can make and break the experience that you have. And as you were saying, in France, not in France, you know, customer experience or
Customers always wrong.
the last thing they want to do is help you. So there's absolutely no sense of service whatsoever. But it's key to creating this bond, to being able to understand what the customer is looking for. This is something I always train my team. Never, ever, ever assume anything about anybody just by the way they look. I myself was a guilty party. I remember once in the Rue Royale store for Virtu, there was a guy ringing the bell, of course, because it's very expensive. The doors are locked. There was a guard that opened the door. He came off a motorcycle and he came into the store with his helmet on. Well, I asked him to please take your helmet off. And is he here to deliver something? He said, no, I'm here to see phones. Like, oh. So I kindly invited him into the store, sat him down, brought him right away a glass of champagne. And to make a long story short, this was a German guy. He was a movie producer. He bought one of the first price phones at 6,000 euros and he came back on a regular basis to buy whatever new phones we came into our system of CRM, client relations management. We kept in regular contact. And he bought probably in the end, I lost contact with him because I moved on to do other things within the company, but he had 7 or 8 phones. Julian Drey, who's a very famous French politician. Anybody know who Julian Drey is or heard of him? He's a socialist politician.
Socialist buying for 2 phones.
He had a number of Virtu phones. A number of them.
Yeah.
So never assume anything. Yes, Al?
So I have a question, which is around the cultural context. So like you see, there's a lot of luxury hotels here, right, in this part of the world. And they cater to different markets, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of customer service or selling, there's huge differences between, like, I don't know about you, but I can't stand to have a salesperson follow me around the store. I can't stand that. I would rather browse. Like, I don't want, because I feel guilty. I feel they're going to push me or whatever, right? But other people are different. And so what I wonder, when you have a global brand, because I taught in India for a number of years, at university teaching, and they put you up in a 5-star hotel because otherwise you get sick. So that's it's worth it. That's cheaper than buying at home. And so the one that we stayed at, their specialty is customer service. So what that means is, within a day, everybody knows you're there for like a month. You're staying in this hotel or 3 weeks, right? And everybody knows your name, right? But there was 1 year, so that's who doesn't like that? I mean, that's nice. But there was 1 year that we were staying on a floor and the man detailed the room. So this is like an example, right? I would go out to work, my husband was with me, and I'd come back and, like my shoes were rearranged because it was more aesthetic. Or my makeup was put in a different place. I hated it, right? It's like, leave my stuff. I used to hide that stuff. I kept my lipstick and I went to work. So where were you thinking? And even to the point, like, he would make us bookmarks because we were reading, like, that was before Kobo and stuff, right? Or before I decided to get onto it. So he would make bookmarks that matched the book. He told me that. He hated that, right? To the point where I almost didn't tip him and said, no, in a third world country like that. So I talked to my Indian colleagues and they said, yeah, but Indians like that. That's an acknowledgement of the fact that you're a person, and it's almost like having a valet. But North Americans don't like that. At least I don't like that. So the upshot of it all, though, is the following year, I was going, oh God, let's not pick up at the same floor. I don't want to be on that floor. I can't handle it again. So we worked on the same floor, with a different floor. And after about 3 or 4 days, I husband looked at me and I looked at him and I said, you know, I kind of miss him. So you can be, my point is, customers can be educated
Yes.
around what service is, but also there's cultural things about like not wanting people to stand too close to you. And I felt what he was doing was a real invasion. When you start going through a movie by me, like that's beyond cleaning the room, you know? So how do you handle that in a store? Like what makes a good salesperson in Paris might be very different than what makes a good salesperson in Singapore, for example.
Absolutely. That was something that at Virtu, because we had stores across the globe,
Right.
I trained the teams according to the culture that they were in and to understand if they had someone from a culture that was not their own, their behavior. Middle Eastern customers in the Paris store were a big part of the countries that really love Virtu phones, the Middle Eastern countries, Russia, and China. So you have three very, very different cultures, and when they travel, of course, they would come into a store in another country. We had to train the teams on cultural differences, personal distances, what's correct in one country is not correct in another. But a really good salesperson, it's a very, I feel like it's a game of chess. It's a very intellectual game. When you can move someone who comes into a store and it's really like, what do you sell here? Furniture. And then that customer comes back, it becomes a loyal customer, comes back 2 or 3 times. It's very hard to put in words. A lot of it is about feeling. It's about each of the sales team had to have a certain culture. I'll put it that way. It's just not anybody who could be a salesperson in a luxury retail store, like Cartier, something to that effect. Yes, Patricia.
Which leads me to a question I've asked you earlier. The family's worth $200 billion. They don't sell online. The whole strategy, the loyalty strategy, is based on those salespeople. How much do you think the salespeople earn?
This is the thing. They're the most, for me, the most important person in the store, and of course they make very little. Those who work for Louis Vuitton, usually they're right out of school. They've gotten a luxury degree of some kind. It's a way for them to enter the company. They probably make, they're lucky if they make 2,000 euros a month. They don't make a lot of money. And then if they're good, they might make commission, or the store gets group commission. There are ways that they can, over the period of time, they can make, but they're not going to make a career out of it. You can't do that for your whole life, unless you're at Cartier and you become the top salesperson. Patricia.
Isn't it also suggesting that the brand loyalty is running through the staff?
Yes, yes.
Like they are not there for the work, they are there to be close to that brand that they're never going to be able to afford.
Absolutely, absolutely. People who will accept to work at places like Dior or Chanel as stagiaire in French, they don't get paid anything. They're in school. They might have 6 months of a work study thing and they might get 500 euros a month, but it's just a dream to be close to the brand. Yes?
Jill, I was just going to say, following on from your point about never make assumptions, do you remember the scene in Pretty Woman?
Yes.
That was always stuck in my head. Your loss when she went back the next day.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to move on. So, again, that's what we're talking about, how the staff can make or break a brand. And these are the things, just some of the things that those salespeople who don't make very much money need to be. They have to, on that feet all the time, thinking about what they need to do to move their client towards a sale. So is it, when's the right time to engage in dialogue or not? What's the right time to ask for customer information? When's the right time to ask open questions? Great weather we're having here today. What brings you to Nice? That might just be the only way to just start talking, getting the client to engage. All these things, they have to listen, they have to be empathetic, they have to give a feeling of confidence, they have to be smiling, they may be not happy. Maybe they haven't seen a customer in the store for 2 or 3 hours, which might be the case in Virtu when you only have 10 people a day. You have to be up and out on top of the game. It's like being on stage. It's not an easy job at all. And very crucial to the business. Paul.
If you are smart, why wouldn't you as a brand decide you wanted the best brand staff and just offer 10-20% more, make it be known, and you'd have people beating a path to your door. You'd be guaranteed to get the best staff. And it's such a cheap way of getting a competitive advantage.
You would think
They've only got $200 billion to spend.
Oh, true. You're down to your last 200 billion. You have to be careful.
They might have only made 150 billion.
Yeah.
It may be changing now just because after COVID, all of these kinds of jobs are very hard to fill. We see it in the restaurant industry. They're hard in the retail industry as well too. Hopefully that will change. But yeah, I totally agree. I always would, because retail operations, again, what I did, it's not a sexy part of the industry. So the higher up, so the senior people never really understood what happened at the ground level. Sometimes we'd have stuff going on in the front of the store, and you come back, and the staff would come back into the back of house, and start to cry because somebody had been nasty to them or whatever. It's not an easy job, and it never ever is really appreciated. Only when all they cared about, really, quite honestly, is the sales. So I'm going to change the subject a little bit. This is something that really irks me, these lines. Has any of you had any of these kind of interesting experiences around these lines?
I've seen them.
Yeah,
I've
never get in there.
standing in the rain, and I'm thinking, what's going on?
How can a brand how can that be a good experience when you have to make people stand outside in the rain to wait to get inside? And just as an aside concerning Chanel, someone very dear to me wanted to buy themselves a Chanel handbag on the Rue Cambon flagship store in Paris. Treat herself. She went to go into the store and there was a line. So the guard says, oh, excuse me, there's a line, but those are people who have reservations for an appointment. You can make a reservation for an appointment, your next available appointment is in 5 hours. Why is that good? Why does Chanel keep raising their prices every 6 months in order to keep exclusivity and the demand high?
It's bragging rights.
It's crazy.
It's bragging rights. People can say, when the new Apple phones come out in New York, there's a line 6 blocks, and people say, they brag about standing in line for 12 hours. It's like, you know, something you're supposed to admire is, you know, stupidity.
Yeah, it's crazy. Thank goodness that person decided not to buy them first, because I would be really, as much of a luxury consumer as I am, I would be against that kind of activity. Yes.
I don't know, I just associate to, I have been thinking a lot about narratives when it comes to this, and what people associate with the brand, and self-worth and identity, and because I have this, you know, this bag, it says this about me, for example.
Yes.
And then I think it becomes really attractive to stand in a line like that.
True.
But you're there longing for something else than what you're actually getting from a bag. That's what I said.
It's all emotional. It's
Yes.
again back to this whole intangible emotional connection that people are willing to tolerate on a brand.
Yeah.
On the Louis Vuitton, this is a store on the Champs-Elysees. For any of you who have ever lived in Paris or walked in front of that, I walked in front of that line and had Chinese people stop and ask me to go into the store for them, giving me cash. Why? Because Louis Vuitton, in order to control the demand in their customer relations management system, every person is logged, so they know exactly what they bought in the past. And they're trying to create block resale and gray market. So the Chinese people, once they're on their fichier in French or on their files, they can't buy the volumes that they want. Because it's a full separate business they're called Daegu in Chinese. There are Chinese people who live in Paris whose job is to buy for people in China. And they go into stores and they'll show them what's available and they'll say this, this, and this, they'll buy it and they send it off to China. These people, the Chinese in the lines, they'll be on vacation or whatever, but their job is to go and consume as much and bring it back. It's just crazy, crazy stuff. So I'm going to change the subject a little bit again here. How luxury brands manage slow-moving inventory, because you never see a sale in Louis Vuitton, ever. Never happens. And more brands are not having sales, but they'll have private sales. How are we doing for the time? Okay. And private sales means just that people in their customer base will get an email or a phone call or an SMS from their salesperson. You never really see brands putting merchandise on sale, less and less. Brands maintain the prices through scarcity. So they're never going to produce more than inventory than they need, but they will occasionally produce a product that doesn't sell it. It does happen. So different brands manage this differently. Burberry used to destroy merchandise, and there was a big scandal in 2018 when they destroyed 33 million euros worth of merchandise. Louis Vuitton and Dior were known to burn product. As if it's a fact, they would burn product rather than let it get into a gray market or sell it on sale or whatever. The French government, because as we all have this, fortunately, this movement for ecology and sustainability, passed a law after this whole incident with Burberry in 2019 that went effective in 2022. And domestic brands cannot no longer burn merchandise. They can recycle it, or they can donate it, but they cannot burn it. Thank goodness. But what the brands have done instead is they reduce the production, and then when the demand is too high, they just raise the prices. So this is the part of my career that was a very interesting change from when I left the eyewear industry and went to work in the outlet industry. So why do luxury brands have outlets? Has anyone ever been to Bicester Village in the UK?
Yep.
That's a very, very well-known, one of the best-known luxury outlets, one of the first ones. It's also the company that I worked for. I worked for that company in Paris at the Valley Village. Has anyone heard of the Valley Village? It's next to Disney. It's east of Paris. Same company. And I'll talk a little bit about it afterwards. But brands need a way to liquidate old inventory. And the best way for them to control what happens to the inventory is if they do it themselves. So therefore in an outlet environment, away from their regular business. Because if they sell it in a job lot to some guy in South America or to a guy in Russia where they don't necessarily have stores, they don't know what happens to the merchandise. It could end up online. It could be a million crazy things could happen. They're not in control of what happens to their inventory. It gives brand visibility, so it gives visibility to customers or upwardly mobile customers who may not have necessarily known the brand before, but are in the mall for some different brand and come across the brand. And if done correctly, it is extremely profitable. So, yes.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
If I'm not mistaken, I spoke once with a guy in the States, and I understand that some brands have 2 or 3 brands, sub-brands, and one of them is made just for outlets.
Yes, MFO we call it. Made for outlet.
Exactly. So it's like the surplus of the main brand or the top, and then they have got the lower one, which is just made for outlet.
Right.
Absolutely.
But
I'm gonna talk about
it
that
still
later.
has the same logo on it too. I mean, I've read that a lot of the stores actually make a cheaper version or their seconds that are rejected, and they turn to the outlets with either cheaper versions with cheaper materials and less quality involved in the making of them, and they put them out in outlet malls just to get the brand out.
It's especially in the United States.
Yeah.
Well, basically, it started off as just really being surplus. And think about the volumes that are sold in these outlets. It's impossible that there's that much surplus for these brands. So yes, they have, what they do is they make MFO, made for outlet, and what they tend to do is they take their best-selling product, they reduplicate it with maybe the stitching is a little bit lighter, or the fabric's a little bit thinner, or the buttons are not the same quality, there's slight differences, and they mass produce it for the outlet. The laws are different in different countries. So this is the Polo store, they're the most notorious, Polo Ralph Lauren. And you can see brands like Frank was saying, like Gap, for example. When you get in a Gap store on the high street and you get in a Gap outlet, the logo is slightly different. You have 4 little squares in the Gap outlet that you don't have in the Gap store. So they can recognize, so that when there's exchanges and so on, it's not exactly the same and it's not exactly the same quality. However, in France, the law is, French government, gotta love them for this. You cannot manufacture for outlet. It's against the law. You have to prove that that item, that code for that item was sold somewhere in the EU at the recommended retail price, which is by law required on the ticket. So how do the brands get around it? I can tell you this because I worked on the inside. They do it they put it on their internet site in a corner somewhere. And it's been there for 6 months or the season before, because again, it has to be previous season's merchandise in an outlet. And that's how they get around the MFO kind of part. But if it hasn't been, that's in France. In the UK or the US, they can do pretty much whatever they want. There is a mixture, and if you have an expert eye, if you know a brand really well, you'll recognize the quality and the styles in the full price store and when it's in the outlet. But that still means you're still getting a better quality shirt perhaps at the Polo Ralph Lauren store with the logo than if you had bought just a polo shirt at H&M. Paul.
How do you manage then the people who are prepared to queue in the rain and pay $5,000 for a handbag, seeing somebody carrying one clearly not from the same socioeconomic class, and it's almost indistinguishable. I mean, it has to be indistinguishable but distinguishable. How do you face both ways?
Big problem for the brands now, and especially Ruth shared an article with me recently from the New York Times, I don't know if anybody saw it, about the quality of the knockoffs now that you can get, the copies. They always were decent quality in China, and the brands have always fought tooth and nail to keep those copies out, and severely punishing the producers and the shippers and all that, but it's getting harder and harder and harder for them to even to detect, because the quality is so good, and to break into these cells of organized people who don't always necessarily know each other and connect, specifically like in aspiring, so they can't rat out on somebody else. It's much more difficult. That's a tough question. The brands are really, I think they're going to really struggle with that now. Personally, Louis Vuitton is a brand where some secretaries will save up for 6 months or a year of their salary to buy that one Louis Vuitton bag. Personally, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't want to buy a bag that some secretary had to save up. It's not special to me. But a lot of people don't care.
One question, Jill. Sorry, someone else?
Just let Ken go first.
I lived in Taiwan in the 70s, and you couldn't buy any luxury goods because all of the luxury manufacturers knew that they would be knocked off immediately in Taiwan. So if you were interested in buying something, you flew over to Hong Kong, you bought it if you wanted the real thing.
Yeah.
And it was a bit different now than a wealthier country, but it was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Afterwards.
I noticed, I might be right or wrong, but I noticed a difference in the outlet, just focusing on outlet, between the States and continental Europe. I don't know the
Yes.
UK.
Yes.
And there is a huge difference. The outlet in the States are quote unquote real loud outlets, with the difference of that special made brands or products for the outlet. And you had, there's a huge difference both in prices and quality. How do you explain that? Is that due to the local laws
I
or
think
what?
local laws and shopping practices. Americans are huge consumers. You know, we're recreational mall goers. We go to the mall for something to do and end up shopping. Huge consumption, like it's not necessarily a European thing. I've lived here for 40 years, and Europeans have a different attitude towards consumption. I remember when I first came here, a smart French woman might have maybe 5 or 6 nice outfits, and that was it. She spent a lot of money on those things, and she'd just take care of them. But I remember when I moved here, I emptied my apartment in New York. I had 80 pairs of shoes. I mean, crazy. Good.
I lived in Italy a long time. I had some fashion clients. I ran development workshops, not for this, including Zegna and others. Many of them have production facilities in Tuscany. And I was told by a production manager, this was back going 15 years ago, that the same identical factory that was making luxury handbags and the night chef with the same identical employees, production managers and machines and materials were making on the black market these knockoff bags. Everybody was being paid off. A few were corrupt Italian politicians that went the other way. The factory workers was the same identical workers, supervisors, machines, materials. These were all being sold as, copies at lesser prices. It was controlled by organized crime in Italy, if anybody can believe that. But and it was the identical handbag. It was not made by some people in China as a knockoff with less stitches or something. It was an identical bag.
Yeah, it's evolved because China, basically in the past 30 years, has gotten to the point where they can produce really high quality
Those
things.
factories are often controlled by Chinese in Tuscany.
Yeah, there you go.
Jill,
Yeah.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. These are a few luxury malls around Europe. I'm going to quickly go through this because I'm going to talk a little bit about where my last job was. This one is in San Remo, which is a little over an hour away, an hour and a half. If you're interested in luxury brands, it's a nice day trip. Have a lot of the brands. But the company that I worked for was a Vista Village Shopping Collection, Value Retail, and the private owner is this guy named Scott Malkin. He's a New Yorker, and he developed Via Rodeo on Rodeo Drive off of Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. And when he did that, he said, there's a real market in Europe, in New England really well, for luxury outlets. And he opened Vista Village I guess it's about 25, 26 years ago. It was the first luxury outlet in Europe. I'm gonna move quickly through this. This is where I worked my last job with the Valley Village. And you can see it's not like going to an outlet mall in the US. It's a really nice experience. It's all about the experience. The brands on the inside are meant to have the exact same shop feel as they have on their high streets. You see some of the brands that are here. This is a list of some of the brands, but there were a lot of it's not we anymore, but Gucci, Prada, Saint Laurent, Celine, Balenciaga, Givenchy, Louboutin, all these brands are in La Valley Village, in outlet price. Some of them choose not to communicate in any way. You can only find out that they're there if you go to the actual index of the brands. They don't allow the company to communicate, but this particular outlet mall, there's 110 stores, gets over 6 million visitors a year. It's quite a huge volume. So often, the Gucci outlet store, every day there was a long line, all day long, all the time. Often those stores were the best-selling stores in the outlet version for a brand in Europe. So this is the mall itself, and my role was as customer experience director was to create an experience for the mall itself so that the customer would do the usual things, come, stay longer, spend more, talk about. So I had a team of 30 people. We had a welcome center, we had buses of Chinese before COVID coming through. We had baggage storage for people who were on their way to the airports. We had valet parking for Parisians so they didn't have to fight for a place in the parking lot. We had hands-free shopping. I had grooms who people would sign up, they'd go into a store, a Gucci store, they'd have their 4 or 5 shopping bags. Gucci would call the groom, go into the customer's sign up, come pick up their packages, and at the end of the day, the client would go to the welcome center, the top of the mall, collect all their shopping, we put it in their car, and off they go. We also had a VIP lounge where we did our own kind of clienteling, where we created lists of regular guests to the village who would come and spend. To get onto our list, they needed to spend between 3,000 and 4,000 euros in a pop. I had several Filipino customers. I had one in particular, because I'm on my 5-minute warning here. One time she came and she spent 85,000 euros in several stores. As part of my managing of this particular client, I had to hire 2 vans to get her merchandise back to her hotel in Paris. But you see, all kinds of different things to help the client. Charge stations, many, many different things. So, yeah. Again, quickly, I think there's a huge opportunity in the resale market, especially now that the prices of luxury goods are so expensive. I'm a huge believer in recycling, repurposing, reusing. It's a very big growing industry, 37 billion. It's growing 10 to 15% every year. The watch and jewelry industry is a big, big part of this business as well too. And I think it's a real opportunity for the brand because it allows a customer who wants to give the merchandise, who's finished with it, wants to buy something new, they can give that article a new life, and it brings them back into the full price environment to buy something new. It's a win-win for the brand. But the luxury brands are not really getting it right now. There's very, very, very few luxury brands that are doing repurposing departments or offering reservices. There are third-party companies doing it, but not very many of the brands themselves. Balenciaga is just kind of starting.
Sorry, Mulberry recently offered me, but it was too old to even consider taking it to.
Yeah.
But they offered when I walked in. Yeah.
It's really hard. There are sites where you could put it on, and there's Vestiaire Collectif, which is one. There's the Real in the United States. There's a number of different sites. Apologies.
Yeah, Apple now, whenever you want a new Apple, they'll buy your old one off you, and they use it as a way of getting into places like India, where reconditioned phones are perfectly acceptable and new ones are unaffordable.
There you go. I mean, it's a win-win for the brand. It's something I just don't understand why it hasn't developed more. Some of this we've talked about already, but again, it allows the brand also to control the experience of selling something new and a new person introduced to the brand in the brand environment. That's why I think it's such an important win-win. So in conclusion, buying luxury is a highly emotional thing, and we all are emotionally motivated and affected by the brands. We choose whether we think we are or we're not. The attachment to a brand is very important to the luxury industry, and brands work extra hard to get you to love them. Aspiring middle and upper middle class populations crave and love visible signs of wealth that really old money people or really wealthy people abhor. And with LVMH becoming the first European company to reach the 500 billion value, I think that this is an industry that's here for the long term. And voila. Any questions?
Yeah, so we have a few minutes for questions. We've been asked to leave the restaurant free for setting up for lunch at 11:45, so we have 15 minutes, so ask away.
I think everyone kind of probably got their questions in, so yeah, Frank.
I was just gonna say, there's a lot of controversy now with Rolex. I don't know if you've been following that, about
No.
controlling the market and the resale of used Rolexes and the people who are selling them because they're of value now and they need money.
Yeah.
And the price is going ridiculously high and they're not really worth it.
And it's a lot, there are a number of brands that are like that. Hermes bags, for example, often people will resell a 20 or 30-year-old Hermes bag for more than the price was when it was bought new.
So
Chanel as well.
I have one other question. So is a $3,000 shoulder bag for a woman a luxury item by cost alone?
It depends who you're asking.
I saw my wife admiring a shoulder bag. I walked in and said, how much? And it wasn't like a designer store. Well, I guess it is an end store, but it's not a name that I would recognize. And I said, how much is that bag? And they said 3,000 euros. And I went, fine. Bye.
I think that's true. I've seen the price of handbags going up, just a good, well-made handbag.
Yeah.
Because I think it's on the back of the luxury
Yes.
market. Handbags just suddenly became in, and we all expected to pay more money.
I don't personally think that bags are worth that kind of money. There are brands that, I personally, since I've been retired, I started looking into where I can understand, because I understand the quality. I see the quality, I see the craftsmanship. It's not particularly a brand that everyone might know, but I think a reasonable price for a handbag, depending on the size, is somewhere between 300 for something small and 700 or 800 for a big bag. That, I think, is the real value of a bag. After that, we're starting to getting into all the emotional reasons why you might buy that particular brand.
There's quite a lot of second-hand shops here selling
Yes.
top.
And I think that's, for
I
two
do
reasons.
that.
It's important to repurpose because we don't want to keep consuming everything all the time. And the other thing is it allows you to access to a brand you might be emotionally attached to. But I don't know who goes and buys 10,000 euros for a Chanel handbag now. That bag, before COVID, was 6,000 or 7,000 euros. Even that was ridiculous, but now it's 10,000. It's crazy.
You haven't talked about fashion. Has fashion a big influence on these?
I don't really work in the fashion industry, so it's not my particular skill set. But absolutely yes, because the younger generations are very much influenced by fashion, and then they're influenced by what they see on social media.
Yeah.
They see what football players are doing, or their rap stars or whatever. Personally, there are brands that what I follow now are brands that are more getting into that ecological thing about correctly. Brands like we'll talk about Veja, it's a sneaker brand where they're using the right kind of rubber, it's not the wrong kind of cotton materials. Or brands like Allbirds, which is an American sneaker brand, which respects the environment and only uses recycled products and so on and so forth. Personally, I think there's a whole movement in that direction, and those brands are worth whatever they're called. Yes and no, because some of them are getting into a crazy price point just because of the demand again. So yeah, that's a tough question. I'd say yes, it's part of the fashion, but fashion is different to everybody. What you might consider fashionable is somebody else no. You might be very comfortable wearing Louis Vuitton clothing, and somebody else who would say, no, that's not fashionable for me. It's very personal. Anything else? Anyone else? Patricia?
From some of your comments, I get the impression that you buy brands.
Not anymore. I mean, I was a big brand consumer when I was working, I have to be honest, and I had favorite brands, and I still have a couple that I really like. Those who know me well know I love Todd's shoes, and that's a family-owned company. It didn't get bought out by any of the big guys. They resisted, which yes. It's really good quality. for me, that's a brand that in the past has been worth the money. But they're getting into price points that are just crazy.
Just actually,
Last question.
yeah, just an opinion. So I recently watched, the House of Gucci, which is an interesting movie around why independent luxury firms sell out. You just need one weak person, and before you know it, you've lost control of the firm, which is kind of what the movie's about. But it's kind of shocking that Chanel is still independent,
Yes.
and Hermes is still independent, and they're the only two. And I just wonder, because that's what part of, I think, people's impression of quality that justifies $6,000 for a bag or whatever is the craftsmanship, right? That it's somehow hand done in some way. And so when you have a corporation running it, don't you lose that? I think that most people for watches kind of know, some watches are still small, right? But a lot of them aren't anymore. And I think people know that it's a big corporation. And what do you think they're doing? They're doing it for the cheapest price. So once that game gets out, and I just wondered if you could comment on that, because I would think as an industry that it would be important to try and have at least some iconic brands that are not owned by conglomerate, you know?
But it's a question of who can resist. You know, I worked for Bottega Veneta for on and off for 20 years. It's the largest part of my career. And they resisted all through the 80s. It was a family-owned brand, worked for the family. They were Italians. They were nuts, totally nuts, doing crazy things. But they had incredible vision and beautiful. Bottega Veneta was expensive when I started working with them in the late 70s, and it was when I left in the early 2000s. It was worth the money then. But now, I mean, it's another whole story, but they couldn't resist. What happens is those bigger brands got in, they were getting the best locations first. They would tie up the tanneries to get the leather before they could get their order in. It's the economies of scale, so it's families of the local, small company owners, it's almost impossible for them to resist. A few Dutons, Chanel, Ferragamo, I think was just recently bought by a private equity company, but they resisted for a long time. But it's really, really, really hard. Yes, it's true, but
Yeah, but do you think that will destroy the luxury industry?
no,
Is my
because
question.
Nothing is just.
because that LVMH and Kering, they are machines. I worked at Kering for a part, 1 year of my career. I said, that's enough for me. I'm out of here. It was because there was no soul. I personally started working in the luxury industry because it really was an industry I was passionate about it, but each company had a soul, a DNA, or whatever you want to call it. Those big groups don't. They hide it. They want you to think that each of the brands inside it, they try to maintain that soul and create the aura of whatever that soul or DNA is. But they're money-making machines, not in it for anything else.
Jill, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Jill, thank you very much. Few of us will ever go in a luxury goods store. So, the greatest luxury bargains in the world, probably, are in a small charity shop, an opportunity shop, just off Sloane Square in London.
Yes.
Where people go and give away for the sale by this charity. Did Oxfam, Patricia? You used to go there. I'm sorry, I'm top of the world.
There's home shops all
Yeah.
over. You go to the classiest part of town and you go to that home shop because rich people giving away their stuff can't even imagine.
And people in their shops don't know the real value of what it is they've been given to resell. That's what's okay. So, thank you for coming, everybody. Hope to see you in the next few weeks. If you